All right, so yeah, it's 5 minutes past, so let's begin. There are still people joining, but they'll catch on along the way. So yeah, so we're hosting our meetup now about the Mendix DevTools, and yeah, so my colleague Koen is the one who built the DevTools and who will be doing the most of the talking today. And I will be keeping a look on the chat. So if you have any questions along the way, just post them in the chat, and I'll try to wrap them together and ask them to Koen. If there are questions that I know will come later in his story, I'll just ignore them for that moment. Yeah, that's it. I'll just hand over to Koen. He'll introduce you to what the DevTools are and why you would need this as a Mendix developer in your everyday life. So I've been developing Mendix app for 10 years now, and I use this tool every day. I'm building apps, and I think every Mendix developer should. So Koen, take it away and show us nice things.
All right, well, let's start then. So the Mendix DevTools. I think Mendix, and that's why we're all here, is a great platform which allows you to build applications very quickly. It allows you to do a lot of things very easily without having the technical knowledge per se for a lot of applications. And as a person who comes from high code, that always kind of amazed me, right? One thing I thought was kind of missing, though, as somebody who was experienced in high code as well, was certain dev tools. And at a certain point, I started to really dive into the client and the Mendix runtime. And I realized since Mendix is a platform, you can pretty much get a lot of these valuable things out of it and build tools like I did for it, right? And that's exactly what I did, really. So I built a dev tool. It's a Chrome extension, and it allows you to do a lot of things to make your life as a developer easier. So what kind of things am I actually talking about, right? Let me hide everybody here in the meantime. So one of the major things I think that this tool allows you to do is to verify your application security. So in the basics, it kind of functions like a pen test of sorts. So everything that the user that's logged into your application is able to extract from the APIs will be visible in the DevTool, right? So if you have an anonymous user, you can see what kind of access that kind of user has. If you have a administrator, you can see what kind of access that person has. And it allows you to very easily go through that kind of data and check it. We'll get back to that, of course. Another thing that the tool allows you to do is to browse this data, like I already kind of mentioned. Which is very useful if you are debugging an application, if you're trying to figure out what kind of data is in your application anyways. And it really allows you to very quickly build quite complex queries by just filling out sort of a data grid on steroids. And that way you won't have to download your database to your local computer, write the complex SQL queries, or create overview screens for everything, or hope that the data you're trying to debug is in your microflow, right? So that really gives you a lot of flexibility in that regard. Talking about more complex applications, I think a lot of us have had the situation happen to them where they joined a team on an application that has already been there for a while, and it's grown into quite a comprehensive application, right? A very big domain model with lots of entities, all that sort of thing. And it can be quite hard to grasp really what is happening in your application. So you want to understand how your business data evolves, how everything relates in your application, right? And when you use the tool, you'll be able to browse this kind of process data and other kind of data in the context of using your application, and just see right away what changes for your data, what changes in your application, and make sense of that in a visual kind of way. This also accounts for the application state. So you have the data which is in your database, but you could also have data like non-persistent data or data that has been changed, which really resides in your browser, right? Because Mendix is a stateless server, which means that no state persists on the server. And that means all the state, all the changes are in your browser, and this tool helps you visualize those changes to see what happens under the hood. Another thing I'm quite excited about is the ability to monitor the performance of your application. Now, this is something we are still working on. However, there is quite a lot of progress there, and I'm excited to show you that today. For the people who've been here for a while, have used the tool for a while, they might have seen a preview of this in one of the meetups I'd done quite some time ago. But I decided to scratch that entire thing and really build it from the ground up. And yeah, I'd like to show you that today. And there are quite a few other things in there. You'll see them along the way, but we'll get to that in a bit as well. So today, I'd like to start off with an overview of the tool. There are really so many features that I have a presentation for this. So you'll see the tool in slides and the functionality of how it works. And after that, of course, we want to show you this in action with an actual application and some basic use cases for that. So without further ado, let's start. So to use the DevTools, you have to do two things really. First off, you have to install the DevTools. This is pretty easy since it's just a Chrome extension. If we go to the website, I can show you. So this is the Chrome Web Store. As you can see here, you can just add it to Chrome with a click of a button, and then you have this little icon available in the top right. Sorry, I got distracted there. In the top right. And the other thing you have to do is to install the module that comes with the tool. And it's important to note that all the things that you can do within this tool are available to the users in your application. So if you want to check the application you're building for security, please keep in mind that we keep this functionality, try to shield off some of this functionality by requiring you to add a module. But a hacker to your site is able to get this information, the same things we do in this tool for yourself, which really makes it important to check if your application follows the right guidelines, if it exposes the right data, right? The module can be downloaded on the marketplace, and that's right over here. So if you add this module to your application, set the enabled to true, then everybody with a Chrome extension like this will be able to use the tool on your application. So it's always good to enable this on like a test environment and not on other places. All right, so that's what you have to do to enable the DevTools, right? After you have enabled this, it's simply a matter of pressing the Alt B or Options B, and this will show you the DevTools. So it will overlay on your actual application. When you start out on the application, you'll see there are a few navigation areas. So on the side and on the top, and of course the most important ones on the left top. And let's just go through them one by one. So in the info tab, you'll see some general information about your application and your user. And if you look at the general information part, you'll see there's some information about the version number, but also one of my personal favorites, the page run, so no more searching endlessly to find out what page you're actually looking at. And there's, of course, information about your user itself. So the user object and all the attributes a user has access to. So keep in mind, everything this tool does is what is accessible for this user. Now, there's also potentially constants exposed to the client, which is not the case in this application. And this is functionality for the info update. Already mentioned the state a little while ago. So the state is everything that is loaded into your browser, basically, so into your client. And if we look at the highlighted part, we see there are several entities that are available in the state. And you also see how many of these entities are available. If we look at the page this DevTool is looking at, you see it's the Mendix forum. And we see, for instance, that we have a list view with 10 questions. If we open the DevTools up again, you'll see that there are also 10 forum question entities or objects in the state. We can take a look at all the actual values there. We can hide columns and all that sort of thing. That's also available in the data grid too. And you'll see the actual data in a grid below. So there are a few icons you should be aware of when checking access rights. And these are the read-only icon, the no access icon, and the unknown access icon. And read-only will always display an R icon. No access will display a cross, and the question mark will display unknown access. So when does this unknown access happen? It's usually for, passwords and hashes. And in previous versions also it was unknown if the password could be written. So there's one more icon, which is the changed icon, which shows up as a little pencil icon. And this will show you the original value of the object you're looking at. So in this case, the attribute, right? And you can see the attribute for the session. So the session related to this breadcrumbs menu has changed from no to the session.
Yeah, so maybe just to wrap up, right? So the list on the left, you see those are entities you've modeled in your domain model in Mendix. The tool Koen has built will automatically generate this overview, right? So you don't have to configure anything or whatever. So if your application doesn't have like forum.question, but you have other entities, they will appear there automatically. The same goes for all the columns you see.
Yeah, there's no configuration whatsoever required for the tool. Of course, except for the enabling it with the module, but that's just a constant.
We just got a question, Koen, can constants that are exposed to the client be changed? Or is this not possible because they're loaded at server start? You can't change anything, right?
They can't be changed, no. I'm not sure if you could hack into it, but it's not something that's available, no.
Yeah, so this tool only does things that the client API allows you to do, right?
Yes, and a few things that's in the runtime, but it's mostly the APIs, yes.
Okay.
But it's all the things you see here are purely client side. So I said runtime, what I meant to say is the MX UI.
I will show the tool now we've got some screenshots, right, to get an overview, but we'll show the tool live in just a moment.
Yeah,
so
of course. Yeah, it's a bit difficult because there's so much things going on, right, to show it live and then guide your gaze to the right parts of the screen. So I think that helps with the presentation. We'll get to a live example just in a bit. Then just feel free to ask any questions or to let me try out something or something similar. So in this slide, you can see that every GUID you see in the application is hoverable. And when you hover a GUID, it will retrieve the actual object and will show you it in a tooltip. And this slide shows you the filtering. So every question in your state, so in your cache can be filtered upon. So for instance, I could say I want to show the answered questions that have a title with Excel port in it, and I could just filter my state as well. There's actually also the ability to specify the search operator. I think I beat Mendix to that before it was in DataGrid. Yeah, you can filter on various different operators for any field that, yeah, so the right operators for the right field, of course. You're also allowed to edit objects, of course, if the user has access rights. So everything you see here depends on the access rights you've specified in your application itself, right? So here you see I'm trying to edit a non-persistable object, but it has no right value, so I cannot edit here either. You can commit an object. You can always commit objects, so keep that in mind. You can perform an action for an object. So I could open a page with this object as an input parameter, or I could execute a microflow with this object as an input parameter. You're able to perform batch actions. You can roll back objects. You can remove objects. Removing objects, again, requires you to have delete rights. You can create new objects, which will require you to have create rights. You can export objects to CSV. And one final thing to note about the state is that you have a snapshot that you're looking at. So the tool will automatically reminds you that your snapshot might be out of date after a certain point. And you can just click the call out or the spinner icon to refresh the state and get a current snapshot of your data.
Yeah, so I hope everybody, for everybody sinking in that you can do a lot in this tool, right? You can't do anything that the model doesn't allow you to do, but for instance, running a microflow on a certain object, if you're allowed to run that microflow, you can run that microflow on any object you've got rights to. And that could mean that you can, do things you can't do in the user interface. Yeah. And this allows you to get a better understanding on what your application is doing, because if you can do that through this application, another malicious attacker might also use this because this is essentially, of course, a very nice tool, but it's not rocket science, right? Every hacker can use that Mendix API and do the same thing. And then again, to use this tool, you need to add that module, right? Still, again, there's nothing in the world that keeps other people from doing the same thing without that module, right? This is a security thing we build in.
Yeah, exactly. So we wanted to make it harder for people to use this tool when they're not supposed to, but also enable developers to check their security, make their apps more secure by adding this module to the places they want to use it. But yes, your point's very valid, Joel.
We've got another question. Are microflows in my model visible to the browser or the tool?
Not really. It used to be that we had the metadata that you could query. I never really added that to my tool since it only adds the microflows that are actually in the page. I think they've removed that by now. So now you are really not able to see any data in that kind of in that regard. However, you are able to get some kind of data out of the UI depending on your version. So you might guess the microflow names that way. Yeah.
So, but to run the microflows now in a modern version of Mendix, you need the name of the microflow.
Yeah, I think the model meta has been removed. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. All right, moving on to the database, probably the most exciting part of the tool. Here you see everything the user has access to, right? Once again, You'll see all the entities, you'll see the count. You can disable the count, by the way, if you have an application with very large tables. And just like the state, you're able to query in your database. However, unlike the state, you're able to do pretty much anything you want with associations. So for instance, if I have this answer and I want to have a question related to this answer, which has an author named Bart, I could just easily open those, those associations and add any query or any combination as well as I pretty much wanted to make it to query the right data for myself. Moving on, so here you see the data once again, and you can see that you can also open up related associated tables within the same table, so you can easily see all the questions related to your answers in the same table. You can also, once again, hover over the GUID, and you can basically do this as many times as you want. So hover your GUID in your GUID in your GUID, so forth, to quickly get to the data you need, basically. But since this is not very intuitive, there's also another option. So if you click any GUID in the DevTool, it will open what I call the object map. At first glance, it looks very similar to the domain model, right? But it's important to understand that this is actual data. So we're looking at an answer object and not at an answer entity. And if I want to know what kind of objects are actually associated to this object, I can open either side. So if I open this one, I can see every object that is being referred to by the answer. So in this case, a question, right? But I can also go the other way. So I can search for every object that refers to my answer object.
In this case, the accepted answer.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So first you'll see the question, and then you'll see the accepted answer here for your question. You can also open this floating dock. If you do so, you'll see the data of the highlighted object. And you can just click through the objects like so and see the data that's actually relevant for you. And if it's like this case, there are multiple answers to your question, you can just select the right one for you in this list. And you're also able to zoom in on any of this data. But we'll get to that in a bit, and I'll show you how this works in practice, which so far is much more fun. But before we do, there are some other things I'd like to show in this presentation still. One thing is the user switcher. Now, of course, there is a demo user switcher within Mendix, but what this allows you to do is use a sort of demo user switcher on any place you want, really. Of course, I would not recommend storing your passwords in this if it's actually containing sensitive information, so keep that in mind. But it allows you to create any number of user password combinations, also for the same user role. And it functions basically the same or similar to the demo switcher. You can click the icon and just switch between your various users. Now, there are various other things like the page analysis, which shows you the content of a data grid, which is not exposed in your state, since it refers to partial objects. There are some other things like the settings. And the final thing I'd like to show you is you're also able to open it in a new tab. So you can put the scheduler on a separate window, or even monitor your performance while you're going through your application. Now, if you ever get lost, there is a quick start in here. We also have a Discord. I must admit, I have not been on the Discord for a while, but we just rebooted it a bit. And here you'll find the basic information for the tool, right? So that was quite a lot of information, maybe. So I'm curious if anybody so far would like to have to ask me anything. So does anybody have some questions?
Now we've had all the questions that came up. So I would just go and show it live. I'll ask questions if they pop up.
Sure, let's do it. All right. So it's kind of hard to find a suitable application that you can show for any number of people. So I chose to show you today a demo application that I'm using for development of the performance monitor, really. And what I'd like to show you first, excuse me, I'll just close the window. All kinds of construction work going on. What I'd like to show you first is how you might use the tool to fix a problem for yourself, right?
So you just pressed Alt B, right? And then this comes up.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's becomes such an intuitive thing for me. But yeah, you press Alt B and you can toggle the tools and remember your current tab and all that sort of thing, right? All right, so this application does have a workflow in it. I actually have disabled security on this particular application. So if you can see in the security, you'll see that security level is off, which basically allows us to see everything that's in the application and use it as sort of a database query. Now, if, for instance, I had an issue with a workflow and I want to find out a particular object, I could go to my workflow activity and I wondered if, when did this workflow start, for instance, right? So I'll look for a start workflow. But I also want to specify it a little further to go to a particular workflow that I had in mind. And I do know that this workflow has been completed like after the 26th of June. So I can add that query as well. I can go to my workflow definition and say, I only want a workflow that is not obsolete, for instance. I could say I want to have a specific version, for instance, to search this. Now, I changed this hash to 1, so don't be surprised. I think I set obsolete true. That's not right. Anyway, so then we have a few object results, right? And then I can
so this is really powerful in my mind, because what I used this for in a real situation was that we were having a go live and one of our developers got a baby, and I had to jump in and with not a lot of knowledge of that application. And then if you have an application with running workflows and a lot of data and stuff going wrong, how do you know what's what? And if you're doing, for instance, complex XPaths on an already live environment, you can really go into these tools, recreate your XPath, well, clicking them together and seeing what data is there, and does that line up with what I thought that should be there, right? So that really helps you as a developer to see what's going on with your data.
Yeah, for instance, if you are in DevOps, it's pretty invaluable in my opinion, because you can just very quickly look, why is this object not functioning, right? Why is this date not there, and when did the date change? You can just see it very quickly for very specific objects of your database. For instance, if you had to write this query with SQL, you had to make, let's see, 6 joins at least, and put all kinds of work clauses in there. It just takes time, right? And if you're, let me admit some people. Yes, and if you are in a hurry and trying to fix something, that's just something you not resort to as quickly. Now you can just press Alt B, press a few buttons and fill in a few inputs, and you're pretty much done with that.
Of course, the big, you can only see the data you've got access to, right? So that's something to keep in mind.
Of course, yeah. Now let me sort this on the end time. I can basically sort it on multiple things as well, but let's just say the end time for now. I could also, yeah, just show the things I would like to show, but what I want to do right now is to let's explore the first one, right? So now I've opened a workflow activity. Once again, this is a object, so I see the data of this workflow activity. It's the start, and I can just explore what's related to this. So, for instance, I see that after the start there will be a call microflow action. This can tell me something about my model and how things works. Of course, this is an example. I'd love to show you a very big and complex application, but it's always tricky to get the application that I can actually show in this context. So use some, I don't know, think about how this could also reflect in your own applications, right?
These are examples from the system module, but you can, show entities from every module you've got, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Can also say I only want to see the objects that are actually related to it. Now I can see that this workflow activity is related to a workflow. I could check what kind of things are in this workflow, right? If it's the right workflow. And I could just center on this workflow by pressing, I'll just show you to open something else, by pressing this button. So now the entity map focuses around the workflow. And if I open the workflow, I can see all the things that are related to this workflow, right? So I can see the workflow definition, I can see the workflow version that is related to this. But I can also see every single step that's in this workflow. So I can see the start, the call microflow, and the end. I chose a very complex workflow for this demonstration. But you can look at this, right? And can say, okay, I want to know more about the call microflow. So select it here, then I can further explore this as well from this call microflow. You can just see, okay, after the call microflow, there's an end activity. But this really allows you to visually look through your data and understand your application. And Charlie already mentioned something. If you're in a big application and you're just thrown into there and you don't know exactly how things work, well, you can see your domain model, but you just don't know what objects are actually created, for instance, during a certain step in your process, right? And it becomes very hard to understand how your application fits together. And I think this will really help with that. So this is an example of query and using the entity or the object map to explore your data. I have disabled, like I said, the security, but let's turn that on again. And let's get in some more like pen testing kind of scenario.
Yeah, so there are a number of things you can achieve with these tools, right? So on the one hand, you have better insights in your application, so it could help you during development, but also a lot during bug fixing and understanding what's going on with your data in your application. And then on the other hand, you can check if the security you've modeled, if that's working out the way you thought. And that's something we'll dive into more now, right?
That's true. Yeah. Our DevOps is pretty happy with this tool. They tell me often. It's really useful to have when you're debugging things. But for this demonstration, we have logged into the application again. But since we turned on entity access, we're now an anonymous user. And anonymous users, of course, always very tricky because they it allows anybody without any login to access your site, of course. So if I wanted to check if this anonymous user has access to data that they shouldn't have, I could just go to the database, right? And in this case, I see there are far less entities available, which is generally a good thing for anonymous users. But I could still check if everything that is available for this user should be available, right? So you can see there's some standard tables like the time zone that's always accessible, or the user role object for part, of course. So that sort of thing. But I can also see that this user has access to data brand, data car, person, and vehicle. So I want to check that out later, right? But first, let's check the user object itself. So password is a unknown, so it might be editable. I can tell you, since this version of Mendix, it's not editable, but it will show up like this. And you can see that most things are not editable, but you can, for instance, change the language if you want to. Now, there's only English in this application, so I cannot really change it. I can just delete it. And then you can commit it, or you could say, I want to roll back it, that sort of thing, right? So it allows you to change things, that can be changed in the application. Now, moving on to a more concrete example, let's start off a little simple with, in this application, it's just some test data, and a random amount of cars will be created. You'll see later why. And there are only 4 brands, right? Now, I set some access rights up for this anonymous user for the brands. Let's check that out. So here you have the anonymous user, and you see one without expat constraints. You have read rights on the name, and a bit of an ambiguous expat constraint on the list price, right? The list price of the car should be more than 500. Well, how does that turn out in your actual data? Well, it turns out only the Volkswagen one, or everyone except for the Volkswagen one, will have a car with that list value query, that works for this very query. So now you can see that the Volkswagen one cannot be edited, but as you see, there's no R icon behind the other ones. I can just simply press edit and edit my Ferrari object, which of course is not something you'd likely want the anonymous users to do. So this would be a security sort of error in your application. Moving on to the cars, right? So I also added some expat constraints to the cars. Let me just open the cars so you can see what kind of data is in here. And what I did is the following.
So you've just opened a associated entity, right, in the grid?
Yeah, so the first level of associations are, you can open them in the grid. Of course, if you have access to them, otherwise it will show you cannot open it. Moving back to the car, if I open the car, you'll see in the access rules that I have 2 rules applied to this entity. The first one is a bit of a read/no write mix. You can see this one over here, for instance. So there's no access to the mileage. You can read the rest though, and list price. And this expat constraint has the following expat constraint. So the brand needs to be a Lada, and it needs to be for a person named John. Now, this is a bit arbitrary in terms of actual expat, right? But
a bit, yeah.
But you can imagine yourself, if you have a user association, which is often very often done, then you have something similar to this, right? You have it to your current user, and this could be something like, I only want to show things for my company, right? So this is the first expat constraint. The second one allows you to read or write everything. And this is only if the person associated to the car is Manon. So if I wanted to check if this access rights is correct in a data base with quite a lot of data, I could just quickly set up some queries, right? So if I go to the person, I could, for instance, check, okay, everything with Manon should be editable. I see this change and I see that everything is editable, of course, for the auto number, which is never editable. And yeah, you could also just change these values again. Now, if I would say, okay, let's check out the express rights that have been set up for Jan, I can see they change to this, right? So Jan will never have a write access. Now, let's add a brand. So get the Lada. And now you see you have a mix, right? Because only the brands or the cars that are associated with Jan will have the read, won't have the read or the write access. So if I check this, I'll see everything completes nicely to no access rule. And if I say no, does not contain, you can see it nicely completes to the full access that you would expect here. So this is some way you can do like checks on your data. Is everything that has been exposed in the first place correct? And how do my access rules actually apply? Because what you'll find often for the situations where things get tricky and complex, you have expat rights that are more complex than the ones we show you here. And there might even be multiple, right? And it can become quite challenging to fully grasp and see how these expat rules combine and what kind of data this actually results in. So this will allow you to easily see that.
Great, good. We've got some questions.
Sure.
There are a lot of people who think it's a cool tool. I agree. Is there any plans to limit the access to the tool for specific roles? I'm aware that all this is available by JavaScript, but would maybe like to make it not so overly accessible for everyone with the tool. So I think the answer is you need the module in your application, and that module contains a constant. And with that constant, you as a developer can give access to this tool or not. And so you could do that not on your production environment, but you can allow it on test or acceptance or whatever, or just turn it on if you need it and then turn it off later.
Yeah, and it's important to note for the people who've jumped in later, everything you see here can be extracted from your application, right? So you should check with this tool and make sure that it's all set up correctly, and then you can shield this tool off from your application by the ways of the module, because it won't load if the module is not in your application.
Yep. So there's another question on scheduled events and queued tasks. Is there any capability in the tool to look at them?
Sure. I think I can show you that right now. Yeah, there's not really much in here, but
yeah, okay. So yeah, this is a view on the database table that logs scheduled events and logs queued tasks and task executions. So that's all pretty easy, like this one, but you don't have a view into what events are scheduled and what tasks are queued, right?
It's just database.
This limits it to the database, right?
That's right.
Great. And then someone else, but maybe Rob, that's a question for later, but Rob is interested in how you build it and how could you build your own extensions and wrap use mx.ui.
Sure, if we park it, then we can do it at the end, if you remind me.
Yeah, or maybe outside this session, but it would become pretty technical if we would dive into the JavaScript side of things here.
I can answer it shortly. So first version I just built in JavaScript. Then I figured what am I doing to myself? I added Vue to it. Basically everything is custom except for the date picker. And I think one more thing I forgot. And it's just JavaScript only. Everything is JavaScript. Even the styling is injected with JavaScript. And what basically happens is if you open the have the extension on your browser or in Chrome, then it will do a very short check if a certain variable which identifies the Mendix runtime is available. If so, then it will do sort of, okay, now you can press Alt-B. And if you press Alt-B, then it will actually load the tool. So that's how it works. By the way, maybe good to also let you know if you're concerned for things like privacy. You can just press your right button and say, I only want to use this extension when you click it, or only on your local host, that sort of thing. So that's also up to you.
Yeah, apart from that, no data is sent anywhere, right?
No, you can check.
It stays in the browser. Yeah.
We don't do anything like that.
Yep. So and so we've chosen to give this tool to the Mendix community for free. Everybody can use it, and we hope everybody does. The sources are not open source, right?
Oh.
At the current moment. Right, Koen, carry on.
Yes, all right. Well, then to something that you won't be able to do today, but I am very excited about, which is the performance monitor. So like I said before, I already had an initial version quite some time ago when I first released it, but I decided that I wanted to have more features and more cool things to show in the actual tool. So let me just dive into this. So there are basically two ways you can check performance. One is somewhat limited, which is just connecting to the browser. If you connect to the browser, it will keep stats on your interaction with the client. So for instance, we'll take all the requests that are done to the server, the total time, what kind of objects are sent to the server and how many are retrieved, that sort of thing. I'll just show you a few examples. So if I just go to the account overview, create a user, maybe set something, try to save it, cancel it, then you'll see there are all these actions, like a retrieve by XPOT. It will show you the time and all that sort of thing. Later on, there will also be a waterfall graph for the total actions, which actually is already in there, but I'll be expanding on that, also on the actual content that is in here. However, this is something that you can connect separately or with the actual connection to your application, where of course the real gold lies, right? So if you add a module to your application, which is the performance monitor, you can add this module to your after startup flow and provide provide a security token of at least 50 characters and enable it. And then you can just say, I want to start it, enable it, that sort of thing in your application. You'll also be able to see the actual logging of all kinds of things in your console. If you want to, you can enable that. So you can choose it without the client as well.
What we saw before up until now, that's without that module, but everything you're going to see from now on, you need that module to get the really nice details. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. By the way, here you also see, for those who have noticed it yet, that all the time zones are retrieved when we open the pop-up. Well, this sort of thing could give you some insight on how your application is actually running, right? So if you're losing a lot of complex pages, then you often find some valuable information if you look at the amount of objects that are being sent and how to reduce that. But anyways, without further ado, we're connecting to the actual Mendix application now, which will open a WebSocket with the Mendix application. And after this, basically everything you do will be logged to the client. So for instance, I just ran a microflow, and this will show you every action and SQL query that has been performed on the server, right? So I could just hover over a SQL query and see the query that's in there. I can browse through this, do whatever I want with this, really just explore whatever is happening in your application. I must say also for this one, I'll be expanding on the possibilities of what you can see quite a lot still, but yeah, the basis is there, and I think the most usable parts are there as well. Underneath here, there's a breakdown of what's happening in this microflow. So you see there are 49 sub-microflows. You'll see the names of the microflows and how much of the total time this execution took. The same really goes for the activities. So you'll see that, for instance, 60% of the activity is spent on the change action. Well, this will say something about, okay, maybe I can change this, right? By optimizing how this is done, for instance. And the same goes for the actual queries. Now you see that 71% is for an adjacent query for the person vehicle. Now this is because there's quite some data in here. But if you have a more conventional application, you often find that this top query might be something that has complex expat rights or some sort of sorting going on, and you'll be able to make informed decisions about, for instance, placing indexes on the right attributes and so forth. It's also pretty performant. So if you ever wonder this, I'll run a big query.
This is a big microflow, right? Doing a lot of data.
Yeah, it's running. So yeah, this is just yeah. So this is the big one, or one of the big ones. And here you can see you can just do whatever you want in this as well. Took me some time to get this up and running like that, but I'm glad with the results.
As snappy as it is.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So there are thousands of things in here. And yeah, you can just browse it, go through it as you please. Now, I've shown you this. It might be fun to show a more concrete example. And for that, I have to log out and use my anonymous user. So let me get back to Performance Monitor, connected. Yeah. By the way, if you connect the browser and you connect to Mendix, then it will take the total amount into account. So it will basically merge the information you have in the client. So when you send the data to Mendix and add that to the total runtime in a visual way, so to speak. So you have more information, you have both. So getting back at the car one, right? So you had two types of expat constraints, and now we want to know what kind of impact those constraints have on my application. So often you'll find that using those kind of expat constraints can become the reason your database is running slow, right? So if I just run this microflow, which does not take entity access into account and retrieves 10 objects, let me do that now. Clear, it's easier. And then you'll see it just took 5 milliseconds to complete this one, right? And the queries itself were so fast that they didn't even take a milliseconds to complete, so you can't even see them on the graph. Now, if I do the same for the entity access one, you'll see that the query took 160 milliseconds. If I look at this, you'll see that it's quite a complex query, right? And it will do the adjacent query as well. And it just takes a lot more time. Now, if you want to debug your application for performance, then you can go through your application and find the big offenders, like for instance, this one could be a big offender if it happened a lot, for instance, and just figure out how can I reduce the complexity of this one, right? By maybe simplifying my expat constraints, that sort of thing. Because if you look at it from a technical perspective, you see the query. I just pasted that into Visual Studio Code for the one without entity access, and you see the one for the one with entity access. And you'll see that basically every time you add an access rule, you get 2 additional queries, which we call subqueries for the access right rule, right? And this is really why your application will become slower if you have a lot of different types of expat constraints and that sort of thing going on in your application. And the goal here is to make you aware of what specific expat constraints and that sort of thing have the biggest impact on your application without you having to set long-running microflow log nodes or SQL query log nodes and that sort of thing, and just have it in a clear overview. Now, I'm also not planning to add something like a waterfall on the thing itself. So you'll have a to log in with the administrator for that. So you just have a waterfall for the total execution as well. But like I said, I'm still working on that one. But my goal here is to provide you with a sort of more of an insight kind of thing that you don't have to query through everything yourself and get some sort of recommendations out of the box. So yeah, that's it for the performance monitor. Are there any questions so far, Sean?
Yeah, sure, there are. Great. Yeah, so one of the question is, was this performance monitor already available for use, or is it still in development? It is still in development, but we're in the final stages. As you can see, it works pretty good, and we expect to release it pretty soon.
Yeah, so what I just got in there for a bit. What I'm planning to do is to roll out a preview version, which will allow you to do the microflow thing that you see here and just make sure that that is stable. And later on, I'm planning to roll out like additional features, one by one, so to speak. Also, of course, curious about your feedback. Keep in mind, I took quite a bit of care to make it as performant as possible at the server side as well. It's all running on their own threads, like the WebSocket and the serialization and that sort of thing. But it's something that you add to your application. So feedback in that regard, if you run into things, don't put it on production right away, right? Will be appreciated there. And then I'm just looking forward to iterate on it with the community for this tool.
Yeah, great. There was indeed a question about performance. Does the performance monitoring also influence performance? Yes, it does, because you add some complexity, of course, and logging to your application. But as Koen mentioned, he did this as clean as possible to limit this the most we can.
So for a little bit details, maybe I implemented log subscriber and I implemented performance monitor that's available in Mendix to subscribe on, and basically that runs on the same thread, right? If you do the action, and then it adds it to a separate running thread, and it just makes the classes for the data, and all the processing is done on a separate thread. And later on, I'm kind of thinking about getting some sort of that you can add to these logs and just say, okay, now I want to clear it, now I want to download it. So also the WebSocket won't be a limiting factor if you have a significant amount of data.
Yep.
So yeah, that sort of things are still in the works.
Yep. So then we got another question. Is it possible to enable and disable the WebSocket during runtime to allow this on a running environment and disable it after testing? I think that's not possible right now because you have a constant, right?
Well, the idea behind constant is that you can enable it or disable it completely, right? So that you cannot accidentally turn it on a production environment you don't want it to be turned on, for instance. But later on, it's the idea to have both, right? Like you can just add a configuration which allows you to enable it and then just disable it at will. I haven't done that yet. but I will in the future.
That would be something in an administration page on the module side, right? In your application then.
Yeah, you can just, I'll just expose a few Java actions that communicate with the class. So
Right. Yeah, so that's to come. Then Silas has a good question. Can you see in which Mendix projects your module is installed? Will you steal all our customers? No, Silas, unfortunately, we cannot see that. We can't even see who downloaded the module. So we only see how many people downloaded the module. So yeah, there's no interest for us there
no.
at all.
Yeah, and you can check for yourself, right? You'll see that no network communication will be sent to anything but the client. So if you don't believe us, you feel free to check.
Sure. Oh, thanks. He believes us. That's good. Let's see. Oh yeah, does it also work in multi-instance environments? So where you've got horizontal scaling applied?
Well, the WebSocket will be a problem. I don't really know how that would work for this particular application. I haven't given it much thought yet. I do have created a WebSocket widget some time ago, and it's just difficult, right? Because Mendix is stateless and then WebSocket is stateful. So I'm not sure yet.
All right. So, but then again, if you were to do performance monitoring, you could take a copy of your database and run it in a non-multi-instance environment.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, you'll expose a WebSocket, but maybe we could also just say, okay, I want to download it. That would be very easy, I guess. And then you'll have the data, and you could. I'm just speaking as I go, right? But you could just import it in this tool, for instance, for visualization or your own tool.
Yeah, it would be interesting to have a conversation on that with the community. What works best for everyone.
Oh.
And we've got a comment: open sourcing it would also be good for security reasons. A nice gift to the community. Yeah, yes, that's true, Rob. I think giving this tool to the community is also a nice gift already. And let us think on that one. Yep. So I think we've got every question answered, and you got everything you wanted to show, right, for the DevTools?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so we've got a few more minutes left. There's something else we would like to show you. Some of you might have seen. We, as we've already said, the last version of this tool was a while ago because Koen wasn't doing nothing in the meantime. We've developed 2 really nice widgets we would like to show you, just really quick, and give you an idea on what to do or what you can do with them, and maybe you could use them in your project. So Koen, could you take us to the planning widgets?
Sure. Well, what would life be like without a little shameless self-promotion, right? Anyway,
Exactly.
we have our products.mismate.com site, and basically it will show you our demos for a Gantt widget and for a scheduler widget, which we have released to the marketplace. So what are scheduler widget and what is a Gantt widget? Well, the scheduler widget is an ability to plan resources, which you'll see on the right, which could be people or anything really, and events, which you'll see in the timeline, and do this really in a very drag and drop kind of way, right? So you can do all kinds of easy things just like that. And you can fully configure it to do basically a multitude of things. So we can say, for instance, we want to render the scheduler in a vertical mode. We could add all kinds of features you see here, like time spans, like milestones. You can configure the events any way you like, really. I think it's one of the more in-depth kind of widgets that has been added to the marketplace in terms of features. I also think we managed to keep it kind of simple by just allowing you to configure what you need and then progressively adding any features that you'd like by enabling feature flags. So that's the scheduler. Yeah, let's also go through Gantt real quick. So Gantt at first glance seems pretty similar to the scheduler, but it's actually kind of different because you don't have resources here on the side and events on the right, but you just have tasks, right? And as tasks are all interdependent, updates, yeah, all rely on each other for the most part, right? So if I update something like this, every piece of data here will need to be updated. You can, of course, do all kinds of things that are required in planning for a Gantt widget, like setting dependencies, that sort of thing. You're also able to do editing of inline data. This can be any kind of custom data you want that's related to your app. So yeah, lots of abilities in our Gantt widget as well. So I'd say if you're curious and you want to check out yeah, either of those two widgets, they are just available on our product site. And yeah, I say check it out.
Koen, are these for free as well?
No, they're not for free, but they're free to use on your local host.
Yeah, so you can download them from the App Store. You can run them on your own computer and test everything out. And as soon as you run it in the cloud, you need a license. Not only because we put a lot of work in this, but we also use a third-party library, which is also commercial. So there is some cost involved, but you get a lot of features out of the box. So just check it out and let us know if this works for you. But end of the commercial for now. And then thanks everyone. I hope you will use the DevTools every day from now on, and we as a community will create better and more performing and more secure applications. So thanks for your attention, and yeah, have a nice evening or rest of the day or night, depending on where you are right now. So thanks everyone.
Thank you everyone.
Oh, we got one question. Are they available for native? So that was for the schedules, for the planners. Oh, Koen is already gone. Eileen will come back. Oh no, are they for native? No, right? These are web-based.
No, native works quite significantly different, so it's not really compatible. It's available for PWAs though.
Great. Yeah, we'll be publishing the recording as soon as possible. Jan will be in contact about that. Right. Thanks, guys. I'm closing now. Bye.
All right. Bye, everyone.